So I want to talk about the two parables that I've been doing a deep dive study in. And I think with these two parables, it will show whether a person know Christ or don't know Christ. And so I'm going to share it with Facebook of all social media platforms. And so this first parable, now I did a deep dive study in it, so I slowly went through day by day, verse by verse, just trying to really get a clear understanding of what Jesus was saying in these particular parables. The first parable was the parable of Nicodemus, the Jewish ruler, who was a man who was very knowledgeable of Jesus, but he didn't know Jesus. He was religious. And that comes out of John 3, 1. First, I'm going to do the first two verses because, like I said, I went slowly through this as I was studying it because I wanted to get a clear understanding of what Jesus was saying. Now, this man Nicodemus, he was very religious. And as we study him, we're going to see some things about him that can relate to us today. And let's just do, I'm going to do these first two verses, which is coming out of John 3. That's John 3, verses 1 and 2. And it says, there was a man of the Pharisees named Nicodemus, a ruler of the Jews. So here we see, as John begins to explain to us and begin to tell us about this man named Nicodemus, John starts off by saying he was a Pharisee. And so if you read through the Gospels, you came across verses where the Pharisees were the religious leader of Jesus' time. These are people who knew the law inward and outward. They knew the law. They could quote it. They could just like memorize it. They could say it word for word. So these people knew the word of God. But it was some things about the Pharisees that really caused them to, even though they knew the word, they knew the Torah, which was the 5 books of the Bible, they had this thing about who Jesus said he was. That was their biggest thing with Jesus. Because Jesus said things that they didn't agree with. Jesus said things like the Father and I are one. The Pharisees didn't believe that Jesus and the Father was one. So this caused the Pharisees to look at Jesus as a blasphemer. Someone who was blaspheming God based on the things that Jesus was saying. But the things Jesus was saying was truth. They were truth. And these Pharisees did not understand that the one that was spoke of in the Torah was the one that was standing right before them. But because of their pride and their just way of seeing things, no one could tell the Pharisees what they believe is what they believe, and no one could tell them otherwise. And so this is what we're dealing with but as we go through this, though, we'll find out this man Nicodemus, he was of the Pharisees, but he was not. It was something different about Nicodemus than the other Pharisees. Nicodemus was looking for something. As we go on in this, we will see Nicodemus is something, even though he knew the Torah, he knew the word, he didn't know Jesus. He didn't know Jesus. So, verse 1, there was a man of the Pharisees named Nicodemus, a ruler of the Jews. So, in this first verse, it says that we find out Nicodemus was a Pharisee, but we also find out he was a ruler of the Jews. So, he was just not a Pharisee, but he was a ruler. He was a leader. He was a teacher of the word, of the Torah. He was a teacher of it. So those are the two things that we find out in this first verse in John. So in John 3, 1 and 2. Second verse, it says, the same came to Jesus by night, saying unto him, Rabbi, we know that thou art a teacher come from God, for no man can do these miracles that thou doest except God be with him. So secondly, we see here, it says the same came to Jesus by night. Why did Nicodemus come to Jesus by night? That's a good question. It's something, it's almost like Nicodemus wanted to speak to Jesus one-on-one, away from the group of the Pharisees, and he wanted to speak to Christ. He wanted to have a personal conversation with Jesus. So he came by night to Christ. He came to Jesus by night. And he said unto him, Rabbi, we know that thou art a teacher come from God. So Nicodemus recognized this is one of the things that stands out when it comes to Nicodemus versus some of the other Pharisees. As we read through the Word of God and we read through the Gospels, this Pharisee, it was something different about him. Here he said that we know that thou art a teacher that come from God. So he recognized that it's Jesus. It says here he come from God. Then he said, for no man can do these miracles that thou does except God be with him. Now, it's something that comes to my mind that as I read through, this is, as I read through the Word of God, and I read to it and I look for details. And as I read, if I read through the Word of God, I never read of a Pharisee doing a miracle. Did they do a miracle? Did they do miracles? I never seen it in the Word of God. So my assumption is they didn't do miracles. So this is one of the things that kind of grabs Nicodemus' attention about Jesus. He said, "For no man can do these miracles that thou does except God be with him." What kind of miracles was Jesus doing? Jesus was healing the sick. Jesus was raising the dead. Jesus was doing feeding 5,000, feeding 4,000. Feeding, I mean, Jesus' miracles was one of the things that really, really got Nicodemus' attention. And Nicodemus recognized that Jesus, it was something different about Christ. Now we're gonna go ahead here a little bit. Uh, we're gonna go to John 7:50 through 53. And here we see Nicodemus, not sure what the time frame is between this chapter 3 and this chapter 7, the time frame in between here with Nicodemus. But here it says, Nicodemus said unto them. So he's speaking to the Pharisees. Let's look at that. Let's take a look at John 7. So we can get some context to this here. So here, John 7 and verse 50. Let's go back up to verse 49. Okay. So here in verse 40, 45, it says, then came the officer to the chief priests and Pharisees, and they said unto them, Why have you not brought him? The officer answered, never man spake like this man. And they're speaking about Jesus. Then answered them the Pharisees, Are ye also deceived? Have any of the rulers of the Pharisees believed on him? But this people who know not the law are cursed. Nicodemus said unto them, He that came to Jesus by night, being one of them, does our law judge any man before it hear him and know what he doeth? They answered and said unto him, Art thou also of Galilee? Search and look, for out of Galilee arise no prophet. And every man went unto his own house. So here we see Nicodemus here. Not sure, like I said, the time frame in between Nicodemus speaking to Jesus by night and here in chapter 7. It doesn't give us a actual time frame on the time between chapter 3 and chapter 7. But here you see Nicodemus, he's speaking very differently in these particular verses, because I think at this point Nicodemus has really, really began to know Jesus a little different. Now let's keep in mind, Nicodemus was a religious man, very religious. Let's get back to that. He was a very religious man who thought he knew Christ. He thought he knew Christ, but he didn't know Christ. Now let's put some application to that. Let's bring that up to our day. This tells us, now we're looking at a man who was a ruler of the Jews, which means he was a religious leader who led people, who taught the law, the Torah, the 5 books of the Bible, and he thought he knew Jesus. That can say a lot to us today. That can say a lot to us today. We have to know Jesus for ourselves. We have to know Jesus for ourselves. And as we go on in this study, it's going to get better and better and better and better. But we have to know Jesus for ourselves. We have to get into the Word of God. We have to let the Word speak to our heart. We have to let the Word speak to our heart. No one can save you. No one can save you but Christ. No one. And these 2 parables that I've been studying, carefully, slowly been studying, I think is a very, very good measuring stick to whether we know Jesus or we don't know Christ. So this is the first 2 verses in John. Like I said, I wanted to share these parables. This first one, I wrote it down in my notes as the new life. And the second parable is going to be called, let's see, the sores in the foregrounds. These are parables in the Bible, but we're going to slowly go through this John with Nicodemus. We're gonna slowly go through John. I don't know how many verses this is. Let's see. It's lengthy. It's 21 verses, so we just did the first 2 verses. So we're going to slowly go through this, and we're going to learn what it means and what it looks like to know Christ. All right, y'all have a good day.